So welcome to the introduction into what will be Ross Restores. Why not? I just thought of that name while I was going to the toilet. It's kind of fitting. Anyway, I mentioned in a short yesterday that I'm going to put a lift just around the corner there and restore a bike. Now, what's the purpose of me restoring a bike? And who fucking cares, frankly? Now, I'm not a bike mechanic by any stretch of the imagination, although I have done a couple of little jobs on bikes many years ago, which I'll come on to in a sec. But I do have an engineering background, and this is where it might be interesting. So, I used to be in the Air Force, and I was an aircraft mechanic, and I qualified as an aircraft mechanic in 97, having joined up in 96, and I spent 8.5 years in the Air Force, and then when I left the Air Force, I spent 2 or 3 years travelling the country doing heavy structural repairs to aircraft. And on this side here I will show you all the pictures of all the types of aircraft I've worked on, and that should last about this long. Go! I reckon that's it, maybe. Perhaps I have to speed that up or slow it down, I don't know. Anyway, and then I went on to read drawings for how aircraft should be fixed for this aircraft. And then I went into risk management for design, and that's all the catastrophic risk, the things that would make the airplane crash for this aircraft. And then I went into maturity management for the landing gear design of this aircraft. And I've spent the rest of the time roughly in engineering up until today. So I did used to have such much more rougher hands than my delicate little pinkies that I have now. And as I mentioned, I've done some work on some bikes before. I once bought a very old hardtail chop where I had to replace the clutch and the wiring loom, and I turned this bike, as you can see, which I'll put there, I did the chopping work on that with a friend of mine, and that was a brand new bike, and we turned it into that. Sadly, that bike got hit by a truck while I was sat on it, and it got written off. Anyway, so what do I want to restore, and why do I want to restore? The world's full of bobbers, the world's full of cafe racers, the world's been full of chops and all that other sort of stuff, and I think there is something honest about a factory restoration, or as close to factory where practical as possible. Now, in order for me to pick a bike to restore, or what I want the bike to be, I'm having to give myself some criteria, and that criteria is hopefully what will make this series a little bit more interesting. And the first criteria is my budget for the purchase of the bike cannot exceed £500. I'd much rather it to be less, honestly. So 500 quid is a max budget. And it doesn't matter if it's a non-runner, I just don't want any structural damage. So, that's the first criteria. First three criteria. £500, it's okay to be a non-runner, but no structural damage. So, that then puts into a category of bikes where I think it lends itself more to a more honest or authentic restoration. I don't want any race bikes that are covered in fairing, because I think a fairing can hide a lot of sins, particularly on a restoration or a spruce up, let's say, and I'd rather a naked bike because sort of everything's out on display and you can see if it's a bag of shit or not. So I want it to be a naked bike, ideally. Right, so what have we got? 500 quid, non-runners okay, no structural, naked. 4 criteria. I hope I remember this because it's not written down. The next criteria is I want it to be a carbed bike, because I'm not clever enough or have the inclination to mess around with the money and time on a fuel injected bike. Probably. I might change my mind, but we'll see what I find. And then the last criteria, I think it has to be something that I would have wanted to own when the bike came out. So I was born in 78. I've been around bikes since 86. So let's say I'm kind of into bikes from the late 80s. And I'll say up until about, before I could be able to really afford bikes, maybe 2005. So we've got 88 to 2005 as our window of bikes. So what's that criteria again? So I don't forget. 500 quid, non-runners okay, no structural, naked, no fuel injection if possible, 88 to 2005. Right, what does that give us? Because it comes out with a list of bikes. We are looking at perhaps a Phaser, a Bandit, a Hornet, an SV, maybe a GPZ type thing, or a Katana-y type Suzuki, something like that. I've seen some bikes out there that are roughly around those prices, and I reckon it might be possible. Now, what makes this doubly interesting, along with my only 500 quid that I'm going to put down on this, I haven't done any work on any bikes or mechanical work for longer than I can possibly remember, and I own not zero tools. I've got some tools. Not really. I've got no tools. So everything I have to do on this bike, I'm going to have to buy the kit to do it. And what's the least amount of money that I can spend on equipment in order to buy a 500 quid bike and get it as close to factory as possible? That makes an interesting video, right? Now, my plan is to do a video as an update on this project every Sunday. It is Sunday today. This is the first one. So I imagine next Sunday will be I've found a bike, maybe, or I'm not finding a bike. Who knows what that video will be. And that's the rules to the game. I won't do any gearbox work. I will sub that out. Probably won't do any engine work because that's not me. My trade in the Air Force was mechanical. So if you think pneumatics, hydraulics, metalwork, that type of stuff. Although I will say, when I was in college before I joined the Air Force, I did train as a machinist, so welding, turning, and I was a fabricator and a welder, but I've not done any welding or machining since 1995, so we can't really class that as a skill. So that's the project. That's the brief to the project. And I think it will be interesting. I think the teardown's the easy part, obviously. I guess the question is, am I going to replace or restore, and at what point, and what's the criteria for replacing versus restoring? Now, I'm lucky that I can throw a bit of money at this, but I don't want to. I want to make this as cheap as possible, as viable as possible, to give hopefully people out there a bit of an idea of, yeah, they could do that themselves. And if you have any ideas on what I should do, please chuck it in the comments. Also, if you could subscribe, that'd be great. But if there's any particular bike you'd like to see, or if you've got a bike that you'd like to get rid of, let me know. And I want to take it all the way through for it to being MOT'd and potentially sold. I do think it has to be a Japanese bike because of the bulletproof nature of their engines. And yeah, I think I can make this cupboard come in use. We'll track our progress on here with some pictures. But I think this is going to be an interesting work. Summer's over in England now. It's pissing down today. It's going to piss down tomorrow. And it's going to piss down for the foreseeable. So this is going to be my new home. And we're going to take something that has been unloved and put a bit of love back into it. So it'd be appreciated if you could stay along for the ride. Any comments or tips or advice as I plod along, please feel free to give them. If you think I'm doing something wrong, tell me that as well, but nicely. And yeah, cheers.